Right, let's dive into something truly perplexing today. Imagine this, a quiet riverbed down in Texas. You've got the echoes of ancient giants, dinosaurs,
Yeah.
but allegedly meeting them. Phantom footsteps, human ones. It's really a place where the deep, deep past seems to crash head-on with an impossible what if. So tonight, our mission, our deep dive, is focused squarely on the Paluxy River human-dinosaur coexistence theory. We're going to try and unearth the factual geological story of this really remarkable site. We'll dissect those extraordinary claims of humans and dinosaurs living together, walk through the alleged evidence, and then, importantly, the scientific debunking. And finally, maybe ponder a bit why such a, paradigm-shattering idea still echoes, why it continues to resonate today.
It's truly remarkable, isn't it, how this one specific claim, these footprints, fundamentally challenges basically everything we understand about life's timeline on Earth.
Everything.
Pretty much. I mean, mainstream science places this huge gulf, we're talking tens of millions of years, separating the last non-avian dinosaurs from, anything remotely like early human ancestors.
Tens of millions.
Exactly. So if these Paluxy claims were actually true, that entire established timeline, it would just poof, evaporate.
Gone. Wow. Okay. And the actual history of this site, the real history, it starts to reveal why it became such a flashpoint. Our story really takes us back to the early 20th century, Glen Rose, Texas. Now, this town is already kind of legendary among paleontologists, right, for incredible fossil discoveries.
Absolutely. It's a known hotspot.
And the Paluxy River itself, it cuts right through these layers of rock, sedimentary rock, known as the Glen Rose Formation.
That's the key geological context.
And we're talking about rock laid down way back in the Cretaceous period. Roughly, 110 million years ago?
That's the accepted age, yes. Around 110 million years. And the environment back then, ancient shallow seas, tidal flats, coastal plains.
Perfect condition.
Absolutely perfect for preserving tracks. Animals walking across muddy shores, leaving prints that get buried and fossilized.
Yeah.
And this is precisely why the Paluxy River is so crucial for dinosaur research, globally. The site is genuinely world-renowned for its exceptionally well-preserved dinosaur footprints. It's not just a few vague marks.
So what kind of tracks are we talking about? The undisputed ones?
Well, you've got the iconic sauropod tracks, those huge, rounded, almost elephant-like prints from the giant long-necked herbivores like Paluxysaurus. Massive.
Okay.
And then you have the very distinctive three-toed, sort of bird-like impressions. Those are from the carnivorous theropods, things like Acrocanthosaurus walking on two legs.
The classic T-Rex style footprint, basically.
Exactly, that kind of shape. And the sheer quality, the quantity of these undisputed dinosaur tracks, it just makes it an invaluable window. We learn about how they walked, their behavior, the whole Cretaceous ecosystem right there.
But then, things take a turn. During the Great Depression, right? The 1930s. Tough time.
Very tough times.
And something unexpected starts to emerge. Locals there in Glen Rose, I guess driven by the need to make a living, they started digging up these impressive dinosaur tracks to sell.
Yeah, as curiosities, tourist items.
And amidst these genuine dinosaur finds, reports start surfacing. And not just reports, but physical specimens of what looked, unnervingly human-like footprints. Right there alongside the dinosaur tracks.
The so-called man tracks.
Exactly. And these early ones, they were often described as unusually large, 15, maybe 18 inches long.
Yeah, giant human prints.
Which immediately sparked these ideas of giant humans walking around with dinosaurs.
You can see the appeal.
Oh, absolutely. And it immediately captivated various fringe groups, certain religious groups too. It quickly became cemented in local folklore.
But not in the scientific community.
No. For mainstream paleontologists, the reaction was, immediate skepticism. They tended to view them as, natural erosion features, maybe misidentified dino prints.
Or carvings, hoaxes.
Or even outright hoaxes, made by enterprising locals. But for a pretty vocal segment of society, these footprints weren't any mistake. They were, in their view, undeniable proof of something revolutionary. Okay, so with that historical picture in mind, let's really zero in on the core claim here, the heart of this whole Paluxy River theory. At its most basic, it argues that these alleged human footprints, found specifically within those Cretaceous rock layers, they're genuine. That's the assertion. And if they are genuine, that would be irrefutable proof, wouldn't it? That humans and dinosaurs actually live side by side.
Which would, as we said, fundamentally undermine modern science, especially the theory of evolution.
And for some, It serves as this powerful argument for a very literal interpretation of, say, the biblical creation story.
And this is precisely where we hit that profound central contradiction, as you called it. Science, based on multiple lines of evidence, places the extinction of the big non-avian dinosaurs around 66 million years ago, give or take.
The asteroid.
The asteroid event, yes. Now, the earliest hominin ancestors, our distant relatives, they don't show up in the fossil record until maybe 6 or 7 million years ago.
Okay, still a long way off.
A very long way. And anatomically, modern Homo sapiens, people like us, we only emerge around 300,000 years ago. Maybe a bit earlier now, but still.
Just a blink in geological time compared to 66 million years.
Exactly. A staggering gap. Tens of millions of years separate them. So if those Paluxy man tracks were real and from the same time as the dinosaur prints, it just completely obliterates that well-established timeline.
And you mentioned this theory is overwhelmingly pushed by...
By young Earth creationism, yes, YEC. This is a viewpoint that holds the Earth was created, well, relatively recently, maybe 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, based on a literal reading of Genesis.
Okay.
So for this worldview, finding humans and dinosaurs together is crucial. It means the vast geological ages, determined by things like radiometric dating, they must be wrong.
And it points towards maybe a different geological history?
Yeah.
Like a global flood?
Precisely. Often, a global flood is invoked as the primary geological event that explains the fossil record in their framework. And of course, it's seen as a direct refutation of macroevolution, the idea of major evolutionary changes over long periods. It challenges the entire framework of biological evolution from common ancestors.
So for YEC proponents, the Paluxy tracks aren't just oddities. They're seen as
perhaps one of the most compelling pieces of actual scientific evidence they have. Evidence supporting a recent creation and, just as importantly, discrediting what they see as secular evolutionary science.
And tied into this whole thing is the idea of a cover-up, right? Who is supposedly doing the covering up?
Well, the narrative typically points fingers at the scientific establishment.
Meaning?
Paleontologists, geologists, evolutionary biologists, university professors, basically mainstream scientists. They're often accused of dogmatism, being unwilling to accept evidence that contradicts their preferred evolutionary paradigm.
Why would they do that? What's the alleged motive?
Accusations range from secular bias, actively trying to suppress findings that might support a creationist view, to more practical concerns, protecting careers, reputations, research funding, all tied to the accepted evolutionary timeline.
So accepting the Paluxy tracks would invalidate their life's work, essentially.
That's the argument made, yes. And sometimes it's even suggested they fear this massive resurgence of creationism that could undermine secular education and scientific authority itself.
And it doesn't stop with scientists.
No, if you broaden the view, this theory often extends the accusations. Media outlets, educational institutions, they're often portrayed as complicit in the suppression.
What are the alleged tactics?
Oh, it runs the gamut. From simply dismissing the evidence out of hand, ridicule, to more active measures like controlling academic publishing, making sure critical papers aren't published, denying funding for research into the tracks. And some proponents even go so far as to claim that particularly convincing tracks have been, deliberately obscured, maybe filled in, or even physically removed by agents of this scientific establishment.
Okay, so that's the conspiracy side. But for those who do believe these tracks are real, what specific pieces of evidence do they usually point to? What are the main exhibits?
Well, one of the earliest and maybe most famous is something called the Taylor Trail, discovered way back in 1930.
Right, I've heard of that one.
Proponents claim it's a sequence, like a pathway, of clear, elongated footprints, bipedal walking on two legs. And crucially, they show a distinct human-like stride. And they're found in the same geological layer as known dinosaur tracks.
Okay, so trails suggesting movement.
Exactly. Then more recently, there's something called the Alvis Stealth print. This one often gets touted as particularly convincing.
What's special about that one? Allegedly, it shows a very clear human footprint, but with a theropod, that three-toed dinosaur print, either overlapping it slightly or right beside it in the same piece of rock matrix. It's presented as just undeniable proof of contemporaneity. They were there at the same time.
Visually compelling, I imagine.
Very. And beyond these specific named prints, eyewitness testimony plays a really big role. You have lots of local residents, people who excavated tracks for years, early researchers, claiming they personally saw clear human footprints right alongside dinosaur prints. Or even sometimes seeing human-like tracks extending under dinosaur tracks, suggesting they were laid down first.
The underneath claim is interesting.
Yeah. And then there's the broader argument about the sheer out-of-place nature of the tracks. OPART, out-of-place artifact. The very idea of finding human-like prints in Cretaceous rock strata is presented as the ultimate proof against the standard evolutionary timeline.
Because humans shouldn't be there.
Exactly. And proponents really emphasize the geological context. They argue these man tracks are demonstrably in the same undisturbed geological layers as the dinosaur tracks, which they say rules out any possibility of them being later carvings or tracks made in softer mud that filled in an older dino print.
So same layer, same time. That's the core geological argument.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
And finally, you have researchers from specific creationist organizations like the Institute for Creation Research, ICR, or Answers in Genesis, AG. They present their own findings, their own studies, often published in their own journals, as scientific validation of these human tracks, even when those studies are rejected by mainstream peer-reviewed scientific journals.
Okay, so that's the case for the tracks being human. Now, how has mainstream science responded? You said there's an overwhelming consensus against it. It's actually quite interesting how carefully scientists have approached these claims over the years. It wasn't just dismissed instantly without investigation. But the conclusion, yes, is overwhelmingly that there is no credible, verifiable evidence of genuine human footprints coexisting with dinosaur footprints in the Paluxy riverbed.
So what are they then, if not human?
Well, the primary explanation, the one that accounts for many, if not most, of the alleged man tracks, is simply misidentification of actual dinosaur tracks.
How does that happen? They look so different in pictures sometimes.
Think about those three-toed theropod tracks again. Often, when the dinosaur stepped in the mud, maybe only the central, longest toe pressed down really deep and clear. The outer two toes might have left only faint impressions, or their marks got obscured quickly by mud slumping back in or later erosion.
So what's left looks like one long mark.
Exactly. What can be left behind is a seemingly human-like, elongated central depression. It loses that distinct three-toed shape, especially after millions of years of geological processes.
And erosion plays a big part, too.
A huge part. Anyone who spent time looking at rocks by a river knows how much erosion and weathering can change things. Natural processes, water flow constantly scouring the rock, sediment abrasion, freeze-thaw cycles, breaking things down, they can significantly alter a dinosaur track's appearance. They can obscure those distinct toe marks, maybe widen the print unevenly, deepen certain areas, making a dinosaur print look deceptively human-like.
Okay, that makes sense. What about the big round ones, not the three-toed ones?
Right. Some of the large round prints that were sometimes called human-like were probably misidentified sauropod tracks too. Maybe just the back part of the rear foot, the heel impression registered clearly. Or perhaps the dinosaur slipped slightly, creating an elongated smear that, when partially preserved or eroded, could be mistaken for a human print.
And then there's the H word, hoaxes.
Yes. It's actually well documented, admitted even by some early proponents, that some of the first man tracks to gain notoriety were, in fact, deliberate carvings, made by locals during the Depression specifically to sell to tourists.
Really? They admitted it.
Some were quite crudely made and easily identifiable as fakes by experts. And yes, later on, even some prominent creationist researchers acknowledged that many of the tracks they had previously promoted were indeed either misidentified dinosaur tracks or outright carvings. The evidence against them became too strong.
What about the anatomical detail? Do the alleged human tracks hold up to close scrutiny?
That's another crucial point. Even the most convincing-looking alleged human tracks, when examined closely by anatomists and paleontologists, typically lack the precise anatomical details you'd expect in a genuine human footprint. Things like a clear arch, the proper spacing and shape of toes, the characteristic heel impression, they're usually missing or inconsistent.
So even something like that Elvis Delk print, which looks so striking in photos, what's the scientific counter to that specific one? People often see that image.
Right, the Delk print is often presented as prime evidence. But with prints like that, the critical analysis often boils down to two main things. First, a really detailed look at the surrounding rock matrix. Is it truly undisturbed? Are there signs of erosion concentrated in that spot? And second, a rigorous examination of the morphology, the shape of the human print itself.
And what does that examination show?
Scientists who've studied it, like Glenn Kuban, whom we'll mention later, have shown that the human part of the Delk print lacks that true anatomical consistency of a human foot pressing into mud. The features present are actually more consistent with, again, an eroded middle toe impression of a three-toed dinosaur track, possibly combined with other natural erosional features or mud collapse features right next to it. It looks like two things side by side, but it's likely different parts of the same dinosaur trackway phenomenon, heavily altered by time and erosion.
Okay, and what about the bigger picture? If these were real, wouldn't we find other evidence?
That's arguably the biggest scientific argument against it. If humans, or even earlier hominins, were living alongside dinosaurs in the Cretaceous, where are their bones? Where are their teeth? Where are their tools? We find dinosaur fossils from that period all over the world. We find zero credible human or hominin fossils from the Cretaceous period anywhere on Earth.
So Paluxy would be this one single spot in the whole world.
Exactly. The Paluxy River would have to represent this geographically isolated, unbelievably improbable global anomaly. It just doesn't fit with the global fossil record at all.
You mentioned Glenn Kuban.
Yes, paleontologist Glenn G. Kuban did meticulous, independent investigations spanning decades, actually. He systematically re-examined these tracks on site. His work demonstrated, very convincingly for the scientific community, how basically all the alleged man tracks could be explained through natural geological processes, the way dinosaur feet actually interact with mud, erosion patterns, or, in some cases, human carving.
And his work had an impact.
A significant impact. It was actually instrumental in persuading even some prominent creationist organizations to publicly withdraw their support for the Paluxy tracks as evidence for human-dinosaur coexistence. They had to concede the scientific explanations were too strong.
Wow. Okay. One last point on the science side. What about tracks being found in deep layers?
Right. The claim that new tracks are found deep down. You have to remember a riverbed is a dynamic environment. It's constantly subject to erosion, cutting down through layers, and also deposition, laying down new sediment, especially during floods. Tracks can be exposed by erosion, then covered again by silt or gravel, sometimes for years, then re-exposed later by another flood. Someone might then discover them and claim they came from a deep, ancient layer, when in reality, they're just previously known features that were temporarily buried.
So it's not like digging through solid rock to find them deep inside.
Not usually, no. It's mostly about the river uncovering and recovering features on the exposed bedrock surface.
Okay, so we have misidentification, erosion, some hoaxes, lack of anatomical detail, no global evidence. It seems like a pretty comprehensive scientific debunking over decades.
It really is.
Which brings us back to that question, why? Why does this theory continue to persist? Why does it resonate so strongly with so many people despite all this scientific counter-evidence? It's almost ironic, isn't it? The very conditions that made Paluxy a paleontological gold mine
The preservation.
also created a perfect stage for one of science's most enduring controversies.
Yeah, it's a fascinating question of belief. And if we broaden our view again, I think the primary driver, the main reason it endures, is that profound ideological and religious imperative we talked about, particularly for young Earth creationists.
It offers potential proof.
Exactly. It holds out the promise of tangible scientific proof against evolution and from a literal reading of Genesis. The ideological stakes involved are just incredibly high. That makes the idea highly resistant to purely scientific counterarguments, because it's not just about the science for believers.
It's about more than just fossils.
It's about worldview. It offers a direct challenge to secularism, to materialism, that many find deeply compelling and important.
And then there's that powerful narrative, the underdog story, and maybe a general distrust of elite science that plays into it.
Absolutely. That's a huge factor. The theory often frames its proponents as these brave truth-tellers, these underdogs, fighting against a powerful, dogmatic, biased scientific establishment that just refuses to see the obvious truth right there in the rock.
So when scientists reject the claims,
It's not seen as a rigorous analysis based on evidence. It's interpreted as deliberate censorship, suppression, protecting a false paradigm they're invested in.
and the visual aspect, the photos.
That's key too, the visual ambiguity and confirmation bias. As we discussed, the tracks themselves, especially after erosion, are often genuinely ambiguous looking. Even clear dinosaur prints can be altered to look more human-like.
So people see what they want to see.
To a large extent, yes. It allows proponents and people inclined to believe to see the human print they're looking for. And it makes it easier to reject the scientific explanations, misidentification, erosion, because those explanations don't fit their pre-existing beliefs. And photos, especially older ones, often presented without scale or geological context, can look incredibly convincing to a lay audience unfamiliar with dinosaur ethnology or erosional processes.
And for many people involved, the emotional stakes must be very high as well.
Extremely high. You're absolutely right. For many believers, this debate isn't just about abstract geology or paleontology. It touches on the very meaning of life, their personal faith, humanity's place in the universe. If evolution can be disproven, even by this one piece of evidence, it affirms deeply held religious beliefs about creation, purpose, and divine scripture.
And there's just something compelling about the idea of a smoking gun, isn't there?
Oh, definitely. The allure of that single, simple, undeniable piece of evidence that could just overturn an entire complex scientific paradigm. That's incredibly powerful. The Paluxy tracks are often presented precisely as that ultimate smoking gun against Darwinian evolution.
Plus, practically speaking, most people don't have the background or access to evaluate the evidence firsthand.
But that's a very practical barrier. Most lay people lack the specialized expertise in geology, paleontology, anatomy, or even the access to go conduct detailed on-site analyses themselves. So they often have to rely on simplified narratives, maybe documentaries, websites, books, often produced by proponents of the theory.
Which creates an echo chamber, perhaps.
It certainly can, and this is compounded by the fact that creationist organizations actively continue to produce and disseminate materials promoting the man tracks as genuine evidence. They effectively can insulate their audience from the decades of scientific debunking, reinforcing the narrative they want people to believe. You know, the true lesson from Paluxy, maybe it isn't just about debunked footprints in Texas. It's really a powerful case study, isn't it? It shows how deeply held beliefs, our worldviews, can genuinely shape how we interpret evidence. And on the flip side, it also shows how the rigorous scientific method, applied consistently over time, works to separate wishful thinking or misinterpretation from verifiable, evidence-based conclusions. It shows us how science actually works, not as some dogmatic institution handing down truths, but as a dynamic, often messy, but ultimately self-correcting process based on testable evidence.
So, to wrap up our deep dive then, the Paluxy River human-dinosaur coexistence theory. It really transforms this fascinating geological site into, well, a battleground for competing worldviews.
That sums it up well.
It's a theory claiming that these alleged human footprints, found right there alongside dinosaur tracks, are undeniable proof that humans and dinosaurs walked the Earth together, which would, in turn, discredit evolution and affirm a literal recent creation.
And that this profound truth, according to the theory, has been systematically suppressed by mainstream science. However, decades of rigorous scientific investigation, often incredibly meticulous and painstaking work by paleontologists, geologists, and other scientists, have conclusively debunked these supposed man tracks.
Showing them to be
misidentified dinosaur prints, natural erosional features mimicking human shapes, or in some documented cases, outright hoaxes.
So as we think about these ancient rivers of time and the mysteries they sometimes hold, it leaves you, the listener, to consider those phantom footsteps of the Paluxy River. Are they, as proponents claim, the genuine imprints of a lost human past, perhaps deliberately concealed by those who don't want us to know? Or are they, as the scientific evidence overwhelmingly indicates, merely the product of geological misinterpretation, sometimes deliberate deception, and maybe that powerful, very human desire we all have to find evidence for what we already believe deep down to be true?
The truth, based on the current scientific consensus, remains etched pretty clearly in the stone of that consensus.
But that captivating what if, the allure of those Paluxy River tracks, it definitely continues to echo, doesn't it? Through the ongoing, sometimes contentious debate about humanity's origins and our place in the vastness of Earth's history.